A well-respected journalist sits in the courtroom, watching as a police officer spins a fabricated tale, one that could send her to prison. The jury seems convinced by his words, until a shocking revelation turns everything upside down. What happens when the truth threatens to dismantle a system built on deception? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Alyssa Carter sat stiffly at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly beneath the worn wood. She forced herself to remain composed as Officer Brandon Tate confidently delivered his version of events. His voice was unwavering, dripping with authority, his badge catching the harsh glow of the courtroom lights. "I had no choice but to defend myself," Tate declared, turning toward the jury with a calculated look of remorse. "Miss Carter struck me first. I was simply doing my job." Alyssa's attorney, David Lawson, inhaled slowly, measuredly. He had warned her. This was inevitable. In court, the word of a police officer always carried more weight than that of the accused, especially when the accused was a black woman daring to expose corruption. Judge Marion Holloway, an older white woman with a face unreadable behind her glasses, studied the officer from the bench. "Proceed, Officer Tate." Tate nodded, his expression grave. It was chaotic. Protesters everywhere. I approached Miss Carter to peacefully disperse the crowd, but she became aggressive, pushed me, and even reached for my baton. I had no choice but to restrain her. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Alyssa's nails pressed into her palm.
Lies. Every word was a lie.
And yet the jury was buying it. She remembered that day vividly, covering a peaceful protest against police brutality, her camera in hand. No warning, no provocation. Tate had shoved her to the ground, his knee pinning her back. He had confiscated her phone, then charged her with assault. And now, he was twisting the truth to protect himself. Just behind her, Tasha Reynolds gripped her chair's armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. She knew the truth, too. But in a courtroom like this, the truth wasn't always enough. David rose, adjusting his suit jacket with a practiced calm. "Officer Tate, let's clarify. You're telling this court that an unarmed journalist was the aggressor against you? An armed officer?" Tate's expression barely shifted, but a hint of tension crept into his posture. "Correct." David nodded, as if considering. "Yet, multiple witnesses tell a different story." Tate gave a slight shrug. "Witnesses can be mistaken. Protests happen fast." David tapped his pen lightly against the table. "And you're saying no video exists of this incident?" Tate didn't even blink. "That's correct. To my knowledge, no footage exists." Alyssa bit her tongue. The footage did exist, she knew it. But when she had gotten her phone back, it had been wiped clean. Judge Holloway shifted her gaze to David. "Do you have further questions for this witness?" David met Alyssa's eyes, then gave a small shake of his head. "Not at this time, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "We'll take a brief recess before continuing." Her gavel struck the wood, signaling the break. As soon as they were dismissed, Alyssa exhaled sharply, her pulse racing. "He's too confident," David muttered as he lowered himself into his chair. "He's done this before." "I know," Alyssa whispered. "But what if we can't prove it?" Tasha leaned forward, her voice urgent. "We might be able to." Alyssa turned, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" A spark lit in Tasha's gaze, determination, maybe even hope. "I just got a message. Someone found a video." 30 minutes later, Alyssa was back in her seat. But this time, something inside her had shifted. A spark of hope. As the trial resumed, David stood tall. "Your Honor, we have newly uncovered evidence that directly contradicts Officer Tate's testimony." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted instantly. The prosecutor, Jacob Mills, shot up from his chair. "Objection. This evidence wasn't submitted prior to trial." David remained calm. "It was just discovered, Your Honor. And this video proves that Officer Tate's testimony is a lie." Judge Holloway pursed her lips. "I want to see it." Tasha handed David her tablet, and he connected it to the courtroom's large screen. The footage, captured by a bystander's phone, played in stark clarity. Officer Tate, approaching Alyssa unprovoked, grabbing her wrist, shoving her to the ground. pinning her there with excessive force. Never once did she attack him. Gasps echoed through the room. Alyssa barely breathed. She had known the truth, but seeing it displayed for all to witness, seeing how effortlessly he had lied, it made her blood turn cold. Tate's face paled. "That footage, it's taken out of context," he stammered. David turned toward him, slow and deliberate. "Out of context, Officer Tate?" He gestured toward the screen. "Do you deny that this is you?" Tate's jaw clenched. "I know, but—" David let the silence stretch before pressing forward. "Then explain it." "Explain this." He pointed to the moment Tate shoved Alyssa to the ground without provocation. The prosecutor scrambled. "Your Honor, this is highly unorthodox." Judge Holloway raised a hand. "Save it, Mr. Mills." She turned to Tate. "Officer, do you have an explanation?" Tate swallowed hard. I don't recall it happening that way." David seized the moment. "So your memory of the event is faulty?" I mean, Tate stuttered. The courtroom held its breath, the weight of the moment pressing down. Then, Judge Holloway leaned forward. "Officer Tate, I strongly suggest you choose your next words carefully." A heavy pause. Finally, Tate exhaled sharply. "I may have misremembered some details." David's smile was cold, calculated. "Misremembered?" Another murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jury's expressions had shifted. Where once there had been trust in Tate, now there was something else. Doubt. As court adjourned for the day, Alyssa felt it, the balance shifting. She had been moments from being crushed by a system built to silence her. But now Tate was the one scrambling. Tasha clutched Alyssa's arm. "That was huge," he cracked. David let out a long breath. "And tomorrow we push harder." For the first time in weeks, Alyssa allowed herself to hope. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Officer Tate walked into the courtroom, back stiff, jaw clenched. But Alyssa saw it now, the flicker of fear in his eyes. His fingers fidgeted against his uniform. He had spent years wearing that badge as a shield. But today it felt like a target. Judge Holloway entered, her presence commanding. "Mr. Lawson, you may proceed with cross-examination." David stood, his expression sharp and methodical. "Officer Tate, let's go back to your testimony from yesterday." Tate shifted uneasily. "Yes, sir. You claimed that Miss Carter assaulted you, that no video evidence existed. But now, we have clear footage proving otherwise." David took a slow step forward. "So tell me, officer, were you lying then? Or are you lying now?" A hush fell over the room. Tate swallowed hard. And just like that, the system built on lies began to crumble.